Welcome, everybody, to this new edition of our InIIS InSIGHTS talk series. My name is Roy Karadak. I'm a researcher here at InIIS, and I'm doing this talk today. I am very glad that I can welcome Harrier Byarugaba here in Bremen. Harriet is with the African Union, where she has been working since 2014. She serves at the AU Transition Mission in Somalia, ATMIS, formerly known as the African Union Mission in Somalia, AMISOM. She has a 15-year-long experience in program management, logistics, supply chains, planning, and administration. And before her jobs at the AU, she has served both in corporate and NGO sectors in South Africa, the UK, Somalia, and Kenya. Today's talk is about the AU missions in Somalia, which is also part of the research project NoPro, in which our colleague Jude Kagoro is investigating the AU mission and Uganda's contribution to it. Thank you so much for being here, Harriet. Why don't we start with you presenting yourself and what it is that you do in this AU mission in Somalia?
Okay, so my name is Harriet Byarugaba, and I work as a planning officer, mainly with military, police, and the civilian component. Yeah, I'm a Ugandan, South African, currently deployed as a South African to the AU. And I've worked in Somalia for many years, mainly in Mogadishu, as a peacekeeper in a multi-dimensional setting because of the operations that take place in the mission headquarters. We have military, police, and civilians, so three components mainly from African Union member states mainly, also for the troop contributing countries which come from member states. Yeah, female, quite not the usual place to be in. I started quite young with the AU. I've been with AU since 2014 in Somalia, in Nairobi now. Yeah.
So how is your everyday looking like in a place like Mogadishu?
Very unpredictable, because you don't know in the next hour or two what will happen. Always on the lookout, having your radio call, knowing where the bunker is, knowing the drill in case of an attack. So when we started, it was mainly in more like prefabs, not hard wall. So the softer part of accommodation. So literally that's quite scary because there will be incoming IEDs or and you just hope that it's not gonna land on your prefab. But gradually, then we moved into hard walls, so brick and mortar. Yeah, it's a very closed up space. So the mission headquarters, the MIA, what they call, entails of different people. So you have us, African Union, which the three components: police, military, and civilians. Then you have UN. Then you have all the other embassies also for the countries that have embassies in Somalia. They're also in the same vicinity. You have different troops from EU providing different support on ground to either ATMIS, African Union Transition Mission now, as it's referred to, in Somalia, to the UN. So there's a lot of key players on ground.
And do you also come in contact with members from all these organizations?
Oh yeah, meetings, trainings, capacity building. There's always initiatives that bring us together. Yeah, so it's one community.
So if you don't mind, would you like to share one of these stories on how tough that life is and how those attacks usually are?
It's quite tough because of the unknown. Some days are better than others. It's unpredictable. For example, December 2015, actually on Christmas Day, we were just about to go to the mess to have lunch, and the ground was shaking. So my colleagues were like, "We are under attack," and there were heavy explosions. But now, you know, as you can imagine, it's Christmas Day. Most people have left the mission. They've gone to be with their families, and a few of us are left behind. So the fighting actually went on from midday Christmas Day until Boxing Day. And during that time, the anxiety, because there's no flight going out, no flight taking off or landing, everything is on a standstill. So the anxiety, you know, you're thinking, will I ever see my family again? Will I ever go home? How do I get out of this alive? So you're hanging on to dear life. And we're not talking about, you know, 100 meters away or 200. You're talking about just by your gate. You don't know what's going to land inside. You don't know who's going to burst in. But of course, having our, you know, troops on ground, but sometimes also they get overwhelmed, and that day they did get overwhelmed. And it was a close call. So now when you talk about after that, and, you know, we made it through, you get a lot of, you're scared because you don't know what's going to happen next. So anxiety, some people even go through depression. Others decided this is not for me, I'm out of here. And they left. So it stays with you, really. And if you don't get proper help like counseling, it goes with you, and it affects you, how you function, how you fit in back home with your family and everyone else. So yeah, it's a very scary. But then, as I said, there has been a lot of change, a lot of developments in terms of we're not having such attacks as often. So that is a good thing, right?
But had you ever considered leaving the mission?
Oh yes. You do. I mean, that makes you question your decisions in life. I was quite young when that happened. I didn't have family then. I was like, I'm going to die without, you know, having a family. How is that? You know, I'm not going to see my mom. I'm not going to see my siblings. I'm not going to see my loved ones. Did I make the right decision to come here? But at the end of the day, if it's not you, then who? You know, what makes you so special? For me, it's the journey, you know. I needed that. It helped me understand. I did a course prior, UN pre-deployment course. So it kind of mentally prepared me, unlike some of my colleagues. So I had extensive training before deploying in Somalia. So it helped me to the point that I was actually helping out during the attack, my colleagues, on some steps to take to stay safe. Even though I'm not military, but at least I had an idea of what needed to be done. So that helped me a lot. Yeah.
Maybe for those who find it challenging to follow how this war has evolved and the fighting has evolved in these past years, maybe you could tell us a bit in maybe a couple of minutes what the current state of the fighting in Somalia is, who the key players are, who the armed groups are, and what this is all about, basically.
So you have Al-Shabaab that is fighting to have Somalia as Muslim state, and they have their own ideologies, and therefore their interest is not to have international community mainly in their country. So their view is they shouldn't be in Somalia. Hence, the attacks and the threats. But also not only to the international community, but to also sympathizers of the international community, so Somali themselves. So of course they also have their own disagreements. It could be political, social, within themselves. You will find that in terms of peace and security within the country is unstable in most sectors. As the countries well, according to the African Union, there are 6 sectors that we operate in. And so the main aim for the AU is to really secure those sectors, kind of liberate them from Al-Shabaab, so that the community can live in peace and harmony. And then the political processes, access, supply routes are opened, but with Al-Shabaab and the often attacks on the convoys and all of that usually kind of blocks all those efforts. Humanitarian aid, yeah.
What would you say, what makes them so powerful, so strong?
They are quite powerful and strong because of their ideology. They have a lot of propaganda, be online. They use that propaganda as a tool to gain presence, gain support through, to their sympathizers. So the main tool really is propaganda through media, if I may say.
And who are the main counter players? Who are the main enemies of this one faction in the Somali war?
Enemy to Al-Shabaab? Really, it's if you don't agree with the ideology, you don't pay tax to them. Pretty much you are the enemy. There, of course, the religious aspect. They strongly believe in the Islam way of doing things, and if you are non-Muslim and you don't believe in that ideology, you automatically become an enemy. You don't see eye to eye. Yeah.
So the central government, what is its main approach been to contain Shabaab factions and fighters?
So you have the Somali security forces that work very jointly, closely with African Union mission in Somalia, through the federal government of Somalia. So they work jointly with our forces. And going to the phase we're going through now, the transitional phase, where ultimately in December 2024, we exit Somalia as per the UN Security Council Resolution 2670 of 2022. Now the transition is done in phases, but the most important thing to pick here is that the objective is to train the Somali forces to enable them to take over securing their country, main supply routes, to take over the peace operations in the country. So the resolution gives, the phases that. So as we speak, the drawdown is going on. So in every forwarding base where our officers are, the militaries, once it's been, once the soldiers have been, once they have been taken out or they've left, then the Somali security forces are supposed to take over that base. Yeah, it's a process. It started, so it's now phase 2 actually in September. Yeah.
What would you say, what was the main challenge since the mission started to get it done, to accomplish what it proposed to accomplish?
It's a complex situation on ground because it goes back to the government and what really their objectives are at the moment of how they want to deal with Al-Shabaab, because at the end of the day, African Union is there to support the Somali government so that they can establish long-lasting peace in their country. We are more of an entity that provides support. So once they clearly draw out how they want to fight Al-Shabaab, then AU works on CONOPS. CONOPS is some military operational plan on how to engage, but jointly with the federal government of Somalia and the Somali National Army. Yeah.
What would you say is the main difference between the AU as an actor intervening in a warlike scenario like the Somalian one and what we usually see when there is civil unrest and then civil war, where this comes with a lot of interventions from the neighboring countries? So how does this work in the case of Somalia, would you say?
So with the Somalia case, as I had mentioned, the soldiers are drawn from member states, which are troop contributing countries. So you find, like, for example, the countries that are providing the soldiers in Somalia are actually neighboring countries. So you have Uganda, you have Kenya, you have Ethiopia, Burundi, and Djibouti. And if you look at the top, those are neighboring countries. So it's of the interest of those countries to actually make sure that their border are secured. And within the framework of the African Union, then they provide that support, but through also the UN Security Council.
What I also meant is that usually when countries intervene in another country where conflict and fighting has started, there's usually other countries opposing the interests of these countries. So
yes.
Who would be now the opposers of these countries that provide soldiers for the African Union mission in Somalia?
Of course, there will be opposers, but mainly also from the Somali people. Not everyone is happy with the intervention in their country for reasons. So you'll start from the Somalis, and you will start also, not everyone in those troop contributing countries are actually happy to send their sons, their daughters to the front. So they might also oppose that. But in the long run, it's for the benefit of everyone's borders to be secured so we can all have peace in our countries. Because once the borders are not secured and Al-Shabaab can cross over, then that means often attacks. You've heard of different attacks that have happened in different countries, neighboring countries in the past few years. And so once you don't have the borders secured, and no one else is really going to secure those borders but except the countries that are affected. So either it's opposed, it is necessary. Yeah.
But is there maybe also the chance for people who are not content with this kind of intervention to politicize the issue within the African Union, and maybe also that may be a way to weaken the authority of the African Union if there's more critique on such an intervention, would you say?
Of course, not everyone wants, often you'll find we don't all want the same things. We might not necessarily understand what it means to have soldiers in Somalia. But then that goes to now our member states. It goes to lawmakers. It goes to the leadership of the AU to sensitize, people. And they are... So it's really goes to the political processes. It goes to the lobbying, it goes to all of that. But you cannot get everyone to support what you're doing. It's impossible. But also it's really, it goes to result based kind, because you can really see, compare, before February 2007 to now. Somalia was a no-go zone. And we all understand that the international community tried to intervene, and that didn't work, with their soldiers, until we had African intervention for African solutions. African problems with African solutions. So you can look, there's a timeline of what has been achieved, and it's very evident that trading is taking place, people are moving free, airspace is open, there's a huge presence of the international community, trading, business is carrying on. Of course, you can't rule out when Al-Shabaab will, attack, but there's a difference, a big one, from 2007 to now. Really, you see it, you feel it, you live there, when a few years ago it was a no-go area. Yeah.
So what would you say is Shabaab's diplomatic strategy to, let's say, weaken influence and authority of the African Union? So is there other official statements and other strong positions of Al-Shabaab against the African Union because of this intervention?
Oh yes. AU is considered an enemy according to them, because it's a battlefield and there are casualties, and of course they will not be allowed to proceed, carry out their propaganda and do that. So of course, automatically AU becomes an enemy to Al-Shabaab. Yeah.
So what would you say who would be people who would, go along with this Al-Shabaab message on African states interfering, African Union interfering, African Union assuming such an authority to
I would say
engage?
Again, emphasizes ideology, doctrine, propaganda. Most people follow because of that. They are very good. Al-Shabaab is very good at spreading propaganda, indoctrinating, and using fear. Don't forget that you don't cross. Fear is their way of, proceeding every day. You object, they plan attack, or they carry out an attack in your establishment or on your convoy, or so. Sometimes people will actually follow not by choice, but because their businesses cannot continue with hotels being attacked, or so it's not by choice. Yeah.
One other parallel that comes to mind is the Afghanistan mission of NATO, when there was a clear enemy and there was a clear evolution of the conflict. I mean, it seemed clear in hindsight, and where the issue always was, as soon as NATO and the United States would announce that there would be a point at which they would withdraw, then the authority of the central government would collapse and the Taliban would take over, which eventually did happen as expected. Are there similar calculations in your perspective on this mission?
Definitely. It is a scary period, and this is an opinion of mine, because it will give them leeway to carry out their attacks and continue to threaten the Somali people on ground and extortion them if, So yes, there is that feeling that now what happens once African Union intervention in Somalia is no longer, the soldiers are no longer there. The FOBs are left open. Yes, so there's a fear of the unknown.
It's usually also this kind of thinking and expectations and calculation which got NATO countries to, on a yearly basis, continue the mission in Afghanistan? So is there talk like this based on the same understanding that we cannot grant them such a victory and they would consider this as a victory because we draw troops back? So are there calculations to extend the mission if that is possible under the AU regulations?
Well, of course, that's not the plan. The plan is to support the Somali security forces to be able to carry out the operations that AU has been carrying out in Somalia. So as I mentioned when we started, before the complete withdrawal of soldiers from Somalia, is that there's phases that have to be carried out: reconfiguration, operations, reassessment, ultimately to be able to hand over to the Somali security forces to take care of the security in the country without AU. And then and also to kind of bridge that gap so that once African Union soldiers are no longer in Somalia, they close that gap and life continues. I think that's what everyone wants. No one wants to see things regressing, going back to before 2007. No one wants all the efforts that were put in to go to West, because we all know what that means.
What would you say has been, let's say, successes or, I don't know, failures or challenges of the AU to confront this kind of jihadi politics like Al-Shabaab? I mean, there are other jihadi groups also in West Africa, Boko Haram and others, who become a real problem for countries like Burkina Faso, for example. So is there one understanding within AU institutions on how to confront this kind of jihadi politics, would you say?
Wow, that's a broad question and has different answers to it. But what I can say is it's a learning curve. There's a lessons to be learned, to take from, lessons to be, learned and to take from, and perhaps do like a stock take of how it should have, could have. But I don't want to take away from the successes because a lot has been put in, and that's including lives. You can't take away from so many young people, who have died through that conflict, and that's their ultimate sacrifice that our, the troop contributing countries have had to give to Somalia, and no one can take that, downplay that. So going to lessons learned, yes, there are many, but one from where I'm standing, and what I can say is that perhaps on a more coordinated way to synergize all efforts in one. You see, there's so many people who are there for different reasons, different objectives, and serving different outlooks. So, but how do we put all that effort? Because it's not just AU. As I mentioned, there's a huge international presence there on different capacities, be training, be, providing humanitarian aid, political processes. There's just so much happening. How do we, or how does AU or UN put all that together and come up with a practical way on how to disaggregate or phase out Al-Shabaab? Because my way of doing things might, take longer, but how do we coordinate those efforts for a long-term solution?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because There are, like you mentioned, there are many other players and actors and organizations involved in Somalia, so not just the African Union, not just the United Nations. The Turkish have a strong presence there, and also next to or most of the neighboring countries of Somalia, there is actors like the United States, European Union, etc. So how is the AU doing in making its presence felt more strongly than, let's say, such a powerful state like Turkey, or such a powerful state like the United States, or an organization like the European Union? So where is, the benefit for the African Union?
I would say that's quite an unfair question, because AU has been there since before these entities came to Somalia. And if it I stand to be corrected, but if it wasn't for the AU's effort in Somalia, I doubt there would be that huge presence of the international community in Somalia. So AU stands out. Our troop contributing countries and police, don't forget also we have police in Somalia. You can't take away from that. So it's not a competition. And I think often where we get it wrong is we are competing with each other for a common goal. But can you imagine if we put that effort in strengthening the methods, the processes, the ways of fighting Al-Shabaab, how strong that would be and the impact it would make? And I'm talking about not just, the military aspect of things, the enforcement, but I'm talking about the logistic support, the humanitarian support, the training, different engineering, medical, that the Somali population can actually benefit from that. If we were coordinated and had one purpose, imagine what would be, So it's everyone, as I mentioned, has their interests, and have, different entities that they are serving. But at the end of the day, we're there to support the Somali population, to, liberate them from Al-Shabaab, so that political processes can take place, so that institutions are rebuilt, so that the government is family supported, so that there's free trade, free movement in all sectors, in all administrations in Somalia, where one can say, I'm going for vacation to Mogadishu, and be very okay with that, So it's complex. Is it achievable? Maybe 10, 20 years from now. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Harriet, for your insights and your reflections on your work at the AU in Somalia. It was really great to have you here and to learn from your experience. So thanks again, and see you next time. Bye.